Welcome to today's webinar, Foundational Concepts for Cloud Identity and Access Management. I'm Katie Paspan with Pathmaker Group and will be the moderator today. We will begin shortly. The next session in our series on Identity and Access Management best practices will be in March. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're pleased to offer a presentation about how to build an ongoing, strategic, and sustainable identity and access management program that establishes foundational patterns supporting cloud-based IAM capabilities. Some of the things you might wonder about are, what are the key IAM functions I need most? How do I decide on the right technologies? What's the right approach and sequence for implementation? How long will it take? What resources will I need? What are the common issues I will face? What can I expect to provide to my stakeholders when it's all said and done? Whether you're migrating from an older set of technologies, considering moving to cloud-based solutions, or just now starting on the journey, these topics will provide perspective that will help you with your planning and improve your odds of success. Let's begin by reviewing the agenda and schedule. We will plan to wrap up the welcome and introductions by 10 minutes after the hour. Then we'll spend another 5 minutes on an overview of the topics in identity and access management. And then after laying that foundation, we'll move to a 35-minute panel discussion. And we'll hold 10 minutes at the end of the session for questions and answers. We have 4 panelists today. Subir Prasad, our lead panelist, is the Digital and Information Officer and Senior Managing Director at City National Rockdale. Vanita Bashan is the President and Enterprise Architect at Ponus Research. Keith Squires is the President and CEO at Pathmaker Group. Eric Schultz is the Principal Solutions Architect for Secure IT. I'm going to go ahead and put LinkedIn information for each of these panelists into the chat in just a moment so that you guys can send them invitations. Let's see. Okay, so that should be in the chat. So connect with them on LinkedIn while we go through this webinar today. Let me introduce the partners that are on the call today. We call this our Identity and Access Management Services Partner Alliance. Pathmaker Group, Ponus Research, and Secure IT have been working in this space for many, many years and have deep levels of expertise in identity and access management. That has been our focus from the founding of each of the companies. There's a wealth of knowledge, experience, and coverage across the United States. Pathmaker Group tends to focus in the middle of the US, Ponus Research on the West Coast and in the Northeast. Secure IT tends to focus in the Southeast, plus European coverage. If you like having a local person to speak with and meet with, we have representation across the US and even into Europe. Let's take a moment to discuss some webinar logistics. If you look at the bottom of your screen on the far left, you should see audio settings. As you move across the bottom of your screen from left to right, you should see options for chat, raise your hand, Q&A, and polls. The question and answer and poll controls are the 2 that we plan to use today. As our session progresses, please use the Q&A button to share questions with our team. We plan to answer questions during the last 10 minutes of the webinar, and we may be able to answer some of them during the panel discussion. Just to the right of the Q&A button is the poll button. We have an interesting option for you as part of this webinar to make it a little bit more interactive. We have a polling capability, and we're going to turn that on and make it available. So I am launching the polling right now. You should be able to see that. So we'd like to get some feedback, and what we'll do is review the results of this poll at the end of the session, and you'll be able to see the results. Help us get some unscientific but anecdotal data just to give everyone some feedback from today. These poll questions are designed to give everyone additional perspective on how they compare with their peers. The polling will stay open until we start the final Q&A session. At this point, we will allow the panelists to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Katie. And just making sure you can hear me okay. We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So welcome everyone, and we really appreciate you taking some time to join. What we hope to do today is provide some data that's both from the vendor perspective, the implementation partners, which many of us represent, but also client experiences. So on these calls, these webinars that we've been doing over the last year or more, really, we try to bring clients to the calls and to the meetings so that they can provide their own firsthand experience. It's one thing to hear from a partner, a vendor, but it's another to actually hear really live use case examples, and that's what we hope to provide as well as our perspective. So let's just start with some foundational information about identity access management, and we've got a lot of people on the call, so I know that there is a wide variety of experience in identity management, but what we like to do is frame the capabilities into a way that you can organize, what you can do and what you may need to do, the different areas that you cover with these solutions. How do you get your arms around it? There's a lot to do. If you just look at vendor material, software vendor material, it can be very confusing, overlapping, a lot to overcome, can be very overwhelming. So what we've enabled our clients to do is wrap their arms around this in an organized fashion so that they see, we call it the 8 levers, the different areas within identity management that you may need to consider using. Now, we do a study called the IAM map, which is a quick one-day assessment to review where you're at in your journey towards a fully mature program. And it covers all these topics. So many of them are, technical capabilities, but it also measures process, and it measures, how well you're governing your program and move it along, how well you deal with operations. And these are all important foundational topics. The last webinar we did covered several of these in depth, and today we're going to cover a few more in depth. Specifically, some that are a little bit more important if you're considering cloud IAM. So that's kind of where we want to lean today's topic, and we're going to get into 3 of these levers specifically that I think will help people gain an understanding of, some of the foundational concepts, some of the benefits of going into these areas in more depth, some of the pitfalls that you may run into, what's important to consider from a strategic standpoint as you look at these. So we're going to launch into that now, and Vanita, I'm going to toss it over to you to begin this discussion.
Thanks, Keith. And so this is, one of the levers we decided we would talk about today, as Keith said. And, we're so grateful you guys are interested in this topic because we think this is really the start point, your identity stores. Next slide, please, Katie. So let's talk a little bit about what identity stores are, right? They've got user information, and you've got 2 basic kinds if you think about it. There are those that are authoritative. If you're looking at your employees or contractors, that's your HR system. If you don't have your HR system, it's wherever you get that information. And that's the driver. Then you've got the identity stores, which have user information that they receive from different places, right? And that's for employees. When you think about consumers or customers, you've got your iamAlliance system, which is really the system which manages the authentication of your customer to their website or wherever it is. But you've also got your customer relationship management, your Salesforce or whatever that is, and that's also got consumer information. So you've got all these identity stores. What's important is which ones of them are authoritative, which ones do you want to, and it's important you keep only the information you need for that system. And actually, I've done a lunch and learn about this on our YouTube channel. I think it's called The Difference Between How You Define Your Data Structures in Your iamAlliance system versus your CRM system. So it's really about deciding what's authoritative, what's downstream, how are you going to synchronize data between these different stores, what are the key attributes you're going to store. So for example, an authentication system might, need the person's first name, last name, email address, and maybe a telephone number if you want to send them some sort of multi-factor authentication. However, your CRM system might need their mailing address, multiple phone numbers, because you're trying to contact them, right? So different identity stores, different kinds of information. But then now we have all the regulations around this. You've got CCPA, you've got GDPR, you've got in Russia, you've got their rules around identity stores. So not only is it important that you have your data sliced and diced as you need it, you also have to be able to remove all that data at, when required. So if the customer says, forget me, then you've got to be able to get rid of all that information. So if you have too many identity stores, that gets complex. So there's a lot of juggling and planning around this. There's privacy. Then there's also the whole issue of data classification. What is it you're storing? Is it PII information? Is it personally identifiable information? In which case you have to be careful how it's stored, etc. So everyone is juggling with this. And even before you think of the cloud, right? You've got to understand what user data you're storing, whether it's for your employees, contractors, or consumers, and where you're storing it. So I know I'm going to turn this over to Subir because I know this was a challenge that he did have to look at when he started the access management project at the bank. So you want to tell us a little bit, Subir, about your experience and what led you to go the direction you did?
Thank you, Vinita. So great point here on the identity store. So I'll sort of give you a little bit of a backdrop. I came into the organization and trying to drive a pretty large digital transformation program, and I looked at security or single sign-on or identity all as cornerstones to trying driving this kind of a program, and primarily with the intent that most digital transformation programs require to open up your ecosystem to collaborate with your employees, and as part of the what I call is the engagement model. So it's no longer just your employees coming into the back office, doing stuff and giving it back to your clients and customers and your partners. We need to be on one ecosystem, sitting down and driving it, and every one of them has different privileges and multitude of access points within the applications in our ecosystem to drive this. And so when we started this conversation, we had to really figure out, where are the profiles? Where do they sit today? What is the authentication store? Is it AD? Is it within the application database that's sitting out there, behind a website? And how do we determine for each of these, not only today, what it is today, what is it going to be in the future? The fact that it becomes authoritative, that you are now going to one place to acknowledge that person, validate it, so that you can then use that to drive the engagement model in this new ecosystem. So again, it sounds like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, because you have to know the ecosystem that you are trying to open it up to, to this kind of setup. And going to the decision towards IAM, we being part of a large financial institution, there was a lot of investment with IAM, and we had to sit down and saying, do I want to leverage what is out there as I was trying to build out this ecosystem, or get onto that installed setup, or think differently about it? And so in some of the conversations that we had with Pontus was, okay, I want to reduce the risk. I want to continue having the latest software, all the enhancements be, enough, literally has zero downtime, because I can't afford my websites or my apps, going down in any way, and make sure that the system to authenticate is available at all times. And so looking at the clouds, making sure that we had what I call is a lot of detailed planning to say, okay, how do we execute this? Gaining knowledge about the applications we want to open up, where they are, how do we sit down, provision, deprovision, as users come in and manage, their, engagement within that ecosystem. A lot of good groundwork up front, then that laid out what I call is the steps of driving some of these key points that Vinita talked about. Now, synchronization also was a major challenge, because now when users come in from one application where they may create, as part of the provisioning, how do you make sure that it's being brought into the authoritative store, and driving that to be the single point for all data, and every application sort of interfacing with that, creating that synchronization and driving that. And we had to create, what I call is really think out loud, because we wanted to make sure that also our colleagues that were helping facilitate the provisioning, deprovisioning was all in a controlled environment with one central group. So if a colleague came in, or an employee came in and was onboarded, then all the rights were given through that single process, but it's also feeding into the ecosystem that they're accessing it appropriately. And one of the challenges we had an extranet where our colleagues as well as our partners and our clients would participate in this ecosystem.
So I'm going to
And
segue there, right there,
please,
because
yes.
that's perfect for my next point. So Katie, do you want to move to the next slide around credential management, please? And the strategic benefits? Let's go to that. Because I mean, what are we talking about? Exactly. Subir, you literally led me to this. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Because what we, found was they had, and this particular organization, it's like many financial organizations, right? The people who were employees and contractors, many of them had accounts, or they needed to use the system as consumers. So from a user perspective, one of the key things, whether you're sending them into the cloud, on-prem, whatever you're doing, you want their experience to be something good. You want them to come back to you and say, hey, this is a great experience for me. So we had to look at making this consistent from a policy standpoint. And that's important, because what are credentials? It's what we use to decide that somebody is who they say they are, right? And it's the management of not just their user information, but it's also their passwords. And maybe you've got some multi-factor authentication bits and bobs thrown in there. You want to make sure that however you do this, how you communicate with the end user, what you do, it's all consistent. They shouldn't think, oh, now it's me as an employee, oh, now it's me as an account holder, all one and the same. So that's important. From a security troubleshooting and management perspective, that's important too, because you don't want to have to think, okay, now I'm in my IAM system, this is what I look at. Now I go to my CIAM system. Granted, there are differences, that's fine. But the point is you're trying to make it as seamless as possible, as manageable as possible. So you want to keep it simple. And that's really where you want your enterprise to have a manageable, easy to, keep track of solution. No matter how complex under the covers you've got to do to make all this work, right? Because the end user and your troubleshooting people, they don't have the time to be running around to multiple spots and looking for different things. So again, Subir, now what you were going to say is going to make a lot of sense, because it's really how we manage the policies, because you had this classic case of internal users also coming in from the extranet. Yeah.
That's very true, and making sure that the processes and the procedures that were in place could be very easily extended into this new ecosystem, and not have to disrupt it in many ways, because driving change is very difficult, especially on the security, because everybody's trying to figure out what kind of trade-off is taking place. By taking this model, we were keeping it very consistent and just sort of improving what I call is the communications around it. And I can tell you, like, we rolled out MFA, and that was very challenging. I can tell, being a financial institution, most of us in technology look at that as, hey, that's easy. But when you have a client base, especially in the wealth management industry, these guys are primarily in 60 plus, and they're like, what? I need to now have use my cell phone. I can just go and do this. I can tell you that was a major change, but we had to ease them into, like, why that is critical. And the fact that we have this solution also sitting on the web, and on the cloud right now, it allows me to sort of enhance the ID as a service capability. If I want to add other, what I call this capabilities, such as out of bound authentication, I want to use biometric or any new form of authentication, I can literally reach out to Pontus and saying, okay, this is some of the protocols that we want to do. Can you roll it out? Because it is part of the tool set. I don't have to go through massive changes on my side, because they will authenticate and pass on saying, hey, we've got this authenticated. Now you can bring them into the journey. Again, all what I say, value propositions. If I had this in-house, I can't even imagine the amount of change management that I would have to go in to try and address, with upgrades and just managing the next feature of this product. I don't know if you want to add to that a little bit more onto that, because security is fast evolving in today's world.
And Eric, do you want to add something? Because I thought you wanted to say something there, right? About your experience with cloud-based solutions, because there's both identity as a service, like the Oktas and the pings, and then there is, the whole concept of taking your existing identity solution and moving it into the cloud. So what have you seen?
Correct. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, just like Sabir is walking through, that they didn't just immediately drop their existing system and just throw it aside and think, well, if I need to get to the cloud, I have to go look at one of these cloud-based technologies, these cloud-based solutions that exist. They took their existing, IAM infrastructure and positioned it into the cloud. And so that's still a possibility to reduce a lot of cost and complexity to your environment, the management of the data center environment, that when you can actually transition what would be considered as an on-prem system into the cloud and manage it like a cloud environment, it actually can help facilitate, reducing cost and complexity of the overall environment.
Also, I think the other big thing there, in my opinion, IDaaS as a service is great if you're really saying, okay, I'm going to be thinking up my policies, I'm going to be changing. Here, you've got mature organizations. They've worked out a lot of this. They do want to move to the cloud. They want to provide the same level of service. And maybe in the future, they do go to an IDaaS system. They could pick that up. But really, the first step is, let me move what I have into the cloud. Let me see how it goes there, how it works for everybody. And then you can migrate from there into something. So you are taking baby steps as opposed to just leaping the chasm and then finding everything breaks.
Correct. Yeah, having to toss all of your previous work aside, and all the effort that you've already done just doesn't always make sense.
Right. So I think now, Katie, we're done with talking about identity stores, which was one of the levers. We've talked about credential management, and now this is the real, 600-pound gorilla. Over to you, Keith.
Yeah, so let me just introduce some ideas. And if you look at this wheel, a lot of these are, more leaning towards technical capabilities, and that seems to be where people want to focus discussion. But there's some very foundational anchoring aspects to IAM that are very important to understand and to get your arms around. And operations is one of those. We talked about program governance in the prior webinar, which was another one that sometimes gets ignored. But let's get into operations. And Katie, let's look at some of the topics that this area gets into. If you just look at the definition, what do you really need? You need a scalable, redundant architecture, the infrastructure, the people, the processes, everything you need to manage, operate, support a program that will mature over time. You can't really start these things without thinking about the long-term picture. And, there's a lot of different things that drive identity and access. It's almost like a fork in the road sometimes, where compliance is taking the reins and they're driving everything that you need to do and support, or your customer, business side and the strategy around winning customers and keeping them and giving them a seamless experience. Sometimes that drives these initiatives. So whether you're doing one or the other, this is still a very important and foundational aspect to get right before you get too far down the road. Just the first topic here, resources and staffing. There's so many companies where their security organizations are being pressed from every side. And it's not because they're saying, hey, go get better at infrastructure and operations. They've got real activities that are critical to support to make sure that the business is healthy. They've got to secure an organization, an enterprise, and that's really where they need to focus their energy. They don't necessarily need to get better at infrastructure operations. I mean, it's a key part of making sure these systems are healthy, but it may not be the strategic direction for the organization and the skilled resources that you need to bring on board. It may be you need to focus those people more on how do we find the right ways to use these solutions to help our business. So what it's leading a lot of our clients and customers to do is adopt a profile that says, hey, we don't really want to invest and spend a ton of time and energy and resources to try to keep these systems up and running. We would rather hand that off. And that's a big part of what has driven a lot of companies to look at cloud solutions. As we were just discussing, some of the cloud solutions will work okay, some of them won't. But if they won't, what do you do? And there's some alternatives we can talk about. But all of these aspects of operations have to be managed, they have to be prioritized, they can't be shoved under the rug. If you don't plan for the appropriate compute levels, storage levels, failover, disaster recovery scenarios, doing change management the right way. We've had some clients that, they really, the security organization is not necessarily a development team. And as a result, they don't necessarily get, really good at a lot of change management. Some of them are, but many of them are not. So do you want to try to spend the time and energy to ramp that up when you're working with a product that's really more of a development oriented solution, or do you want to find the expertise to handle it for you? Those are decisions you have to think about, plan for, justify and decide which direction you're going to go. One example is root cause analysis. If there's an outage or a problem, a mature shop that has good change management will do RCA on every problem, figure out what happened, and make sure that they've fixed whatever the issue is that caused the problem. If you don't have a mature process for getting to the root of the issue, you're going to keep having those problems. It's going to create problems in your service levels. Your customers and employees won't have a good experience. You can get a black eye. It just creates a lot of chaos. Sometimes the best place to start is to say, what kind of SLAs do we need to support our customers with? What's the managed downtime we can handle? Does it have to be up 24/7? Is it a 5 nines kind of thing? If you can get the definition around those, then you can sort of back into, okay, can we handle this ourselves? Is this something we want to get into? Or do we really want to focus on strategic use of the solutions and delegate operations to companies that are better at it? So the last topic on here, I want to kind of launch this over to Sabir here in a second, but when you look at cloud versus on-prem and how to manage and control those environments, what we see a lot today is companies already have a fairly good footprint in either AWS or Azure or other places. So it's not that they're not used to using it, but are they used to using it for IAM? And it is an area that more and more companies are comfortable with delegating to offloading workloads. So working through those scenarios, we always do a shared responsibility matrix to kind of lay out who's responsible for what and what are the SLAs for each role to make sure it's crystal clear who's on the hook for different things and everybody's happy with the way these things will operate. But so many of our clients have experienced huge benefit from offloading this aspect of IAM to a partner. And it's become an area where they've actually realized better SLA coverage, better experiences for their end users and employees, better uptime, fewer issues, quicker resolution of issues, things like that, because they are handing it to a group that does this day in, day out. It's what they live and breathe. So it can provide some key benefits. But Sabir, why don't you share a little bit about, because you've had this journey, you've been through this, you've seen the benefits. Why don't you share more about what you've been through?
I wish I'd met you guys, earlier, Keith, because having all these items in one page and saying, hey, these are the things that you need to consider is good. But working with Pontus was actually very, very revealing, because they had very good knowledge of our what I call is an in-house setup, and the experience there told them, like, okay, if we're going to move this to the cloud, these are the things that we need to consider. Being a financial institution, it's not, the demands are very, very high. Security is paramount. Getting the uptime is out there, and every time there's an incident, it's like, getting sued and, going through a, deep root cause analysis, because we want to make sure that that never occurs. and even what I call is the regular upgrades on the products, making sure we have a sequence, a timing of that, getting the production DR test lower level environments all synced up with that change, test it with the apps, deploying it, all criteria that we had to consider. Even network connectivity, as part of failover and disaster recovery, making sure we've got the right networks configurations to connect to the cloud setups. In our case, like I'll give you a story of it. When it came to the cloud, we debated, do we go with AWS or Azure? Which one should we use? At that time, in our conversations, we found AWS was much mature, and Pontus said, came back and said, we can easily do it out there, and let's proceed with it. Now looking back, 3 years after we've implemented, now I'm a complete Azure shop. But the way I have this structured with Vinita and her team there is, they're providing me a solution as a service. It's a package deal, infrastructure, uptime, it's all dealt with. We had monthly SLA discussions, what's going on. In case there is any incident or anything takes place, they are connected to our NOC. They're able to communicate and get those level of alerts going on. And it's created what I call is comfort within the larger organization that this cloud-based solution can actually work as a service, and they can start thinking about a larger migration with the rest of the organization.
Yeah, we're seeing that with many of our accounts as well. They put their toe in the water. They realize that the water's not too cold, right? And then they start realizing, hey, there's some big benefit here. Let's explore this even further. Yeah.
And what we did, just to add something there, is we have a tool called iamAware, which is really it takes the data real time from the end systems, and it looks to see how things are looking from an IAM perspective. So it's not just looking to see is the system up or is the service thing. It's got synthetic transactions running through. In fact, for your organization, Subir, we have a synthetic transaction that runs through. So even before the team realizes or somebody cannot log in, we have identified there's an issue with iamAware, and we can absolutely immediately address it, which has been a big advantage to why we've been able to give you the service levels we have. And then we've used it to produce our monthly reports that Subir asks for, which really identify overall how many users logged in, how many people accessed which application, where were the registration issues. We actually get all that data, and rather than just having people, because that's one approach, right? Take it offshore and have a gazillion people watching monitors and keep going. But with iamAware, what we've done is we've sort of automated the whole process. So my team that actually manages your solution pulls a report every month that they send you, and almost 80% of it is coming automated. So the only thing is putting it into the nice look and feel, which is something we're automating now. So by next month, Subir, when you get this report, even that has been automated. And so we've sort of built processes, Keith, coming back to this, repeatable processes, so that all of our customers get the same sort of reports, approach, SLAs, and we have mechanisms to quickly troubleshoot because we have real-time collection of data from logs, audit trails, etc., so that we can back up whatever we report on. So that's another big part of it.
It reinforces the point that, what we see so many times right now is that security teams are operating very lean.
Yep.
It's just the nature of the beast, and everybody seems to get more and more work piled on their plate, not less, and they're forcing people to do more and more work with the same amount of time they've had. Is this an area that they really want them spending their time on? It's a question you need to ask at a strategic level, and you may not be able to get there tomorrow, but if you want to focus your team on strategic use of the capabilities to help your business advance, to give your business a strategic advantage in the way they operate with customers and employees, focus your people on the capabilities of IAM and less on the, behind the scenes operational aspects. That's kind of the message that we have heard our clients adopt in recent years, for sure.
And Subir, what's your experience? Because I know so far things have gone well, correct?
Yes, no, we've had our good days and our bad days, but so far everything's been really good, in terms of the solution per se. I think there is a level of what I call is getting comfortable with this, with the solution to say, okay, this is going out, of our day-to-day operational activity, making sure that you have a partner on the outside who can deliver against your needs and step up because, we are pushing the envelope at many times because some of my initiatives that I'm talking about, multi-cloud setup, being able to get, the uptimes, authentication with APIs, connect the what I call is once you get this cornerstone set up, you have to then now start opening it up to a new word order that you are assembling as part of a transformation program, which now you are coming back to, the your what I call is the security solution to say, okay, how can I do this? How can I do this? How can I do this? And it's having that what I call is that partner next to you to be able to say, let's work on this journey together. Let's sit down and enable that with you. You don't have to do this. IAM has these capabilities. Let's get this OAuth capability, and then you can sit down and pass tokens, do these. Like, it's just been a great what I call an engagement because now I don't have what I call is security architects and security engineers in my development team. I rely on Vinita and her team to help partner with my architects on the application side and on the infrastructure side to make sure that we've got what I call security as a service capability being delivered to this in this new ecosystem.
Yeah, excellent.
Eric, anything from you? Would you like to add anything here?
Yeah, I was going to bring up another thing Sabir kind of touched on and might help answer for a lot of people, especially those that are just either not in the cloud today or they're new to the cloud, especially around that. How does IAM live in a cloud? Would a lot of people are confused by multi-cloud hybrid, public, private, everything where we're talking about. But what Sabir just what shows is he's over in AWS with his IAM system, and then he transitions and everything else into Azure, and he kind of helps show, your other companies that you don't have to co-locate IAM. Like if 99% of your companies in, Cloud X, you don't necessarily have to worry about having IAM in that same cloud, that they can actually coexist across different public clouds and work together seamlessly. So you're not tied into one versus the other, because that's sometimes a lot of conversations we get in with people is they always ask, which cloud system should we look at? What can we grow in, right? Where am I going to be best off 5 years from now? Well, you don't have to really concern yourself with that. They are going to all operate independently, but they will operate succinctly and together. You don't have to kind of go all or nothing into one specific cloud.
Yeah,
True.
that's a good point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point. The way we have looked at this solution is making that, that pillar that this is the security authentication solution that we want to use and continue to use as we go out, and we can effectively drive capabilities out of it and let the cloud be what I call is Pontus's problem to sit down, manage it, keep the product upgraded. As far as I'm concerned, I need to make sure the service is up and I'm getting what I need out of it, and my access to the applications is taking place, with the uptime that's demanded, of them.
And I think the other big thing is don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right?
Yeah.
You've spent a lot of time and effort putting these policies in place, working out your on-prem systems. You've done homework on your side, just saying, okay, I'm going to rip all this and go with an IDaaS solution. It works for some. I mean, there's no doubt. But the whole point is if you are a large enterprise and you want to keep your impact low, this is one way of doing it. If you are saying, look, I have a clean sheet of paper and I'm going to figure out how I'm going to do this, you are absolutely at liberty to say, let's use an IDaaS system. But whatever you do, the planning is key. That's not going to go away. You need
Yeah,
to
I've got a
figure
good,
out your identity stores, etc. Sorry, Keith.
I've got a good illustration because we did have an account, longtime client of ours since 2004 that adopted a cloud first profile across the board from IT. So they went down the road of saying we need to move our legacy IAM into an IDaaS solution. So we spent about a year studying requirements, looking at solutions, going through demos, talking about impact and estimating the level of effort, all the different things that you have to look at to do this. And they had a substantial investment over well over 12, 15 years in a solution that had a ton of automation, a ton of integration, thousands of endpoints in their organization. So to pick that up and redeploy all that in a new IDES solution was some heavy lifting. And after all the analysis, they came to the conclusion that, that's probably not something we can swallow right now. So we did offer them, an alternative. Let's let you check your cloud box, but let's take what you've got today and shift it. So we did an upgrade. We did shift over to ABS. We let them check their cloud box. From their perspective, it was, as a service and a fraction of the cost compared to trying to migrate to a brand new solution. So you're very correct in your statement there, Vanita.
Yeah, and we've had another customer, to just show that the other side works, they decided all their single sign-on would only be done through Azure. And they decided no other solution. They were going to go native. They were going to move to Azure, and Azure was SSO. You've got to understand, there's what the vendor tells you, and there's what really is there. So single sign-on through Azure 2.5 years ago was not quite what it was advertised to be. And so they had applications, legacy applications, to which they needed SSO that were not in the cloud. And those were a challenge. We had to build custom bits and bobs. So there are those sorts of things, right? So no matter what you decide to do, there's got to be planning. There's got to be acceptance that you might not get everything you want. Your applications may not wonderfully slot into this new world. And you've got to be aware of those things, allow for those things, and have resources. And then once it's all built, you got to think about the support there. So I think it's a whole package deal. It's not just, I'm going into the cloud. It's, I'm going into the cloud with my eyes wide open. And when I get there, I'm going to have to think about what happens after. It's not just, I'll get there, people will magically now get logged in from wherever they are, and it'll all be brilliant. It won't. That's,
Yep.
I think, the takeaway from this.
And Katie, I know we've got some questions coming in, so I want to make sure we have some time to address those. Is it okay if I talk through one of these questions that popped up here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the folks on the call here is talking about their company, which is a long-term 100-plus-year-old family-owned company in 55 countries. There's a very disparate approach for doing these IAM functions. They have a hard time really, getting their arms around how to control what's going on in these different countries. They don't really have a champion in place yet to drive policy and process. So the question is, where do we even start? So, I think we all probably have good opinions, and obviously you have to dig in deeper with the company's strategies and things to answer that question. But if they are looking at a landscape to say, we've got to start getting our arms around some of this control, Sabir, I'd like your perspective. Where would you recommend, what are the first 2 or 3 things you think a company should consider as a starting gate with IAM when they've got this kind of very disparate kind of lack of control?
You raised the right thing right up there, control. And in my mind, I look at risk management, planning, gaining insight on the solution, and what your information security policy needs to be. So these in my minds are very, very critical stepping stones to drive that. I think knowing your environment, 55 countries, the policies, the risk that's associated with that, you have to actually spend time to understand the implications. What does it mean? I know it's been around for 100 years and people say, hey, what's going to happen? I had the same thing, 35 years company in the business, very well known. And all it takes is one incident. You cannot have this happen. And how do you sit down and get ahead of that? So I would sit down and recommend highlighting the risk in today's world, because cybersecurity or crime is at its all-time high. And once somebody is in, you're pretty much, exposed. And so how do you sort of bring that to light and saying, okay, how do we sit down and have a plan to mitigate against that? And that would be the starting point for that.
Yeah.
An assessment, right? I think Keith, my opinion, we'd start with an assessment of what you have. We did that, by the way, for this very large globally distributed manufacturing firm. And it was interesting. Everyone had their own silos, and they said, oh, we are X country in Europe. We don't talk to country Y in Europe. Don't talk to us. We'll tell you what we do, and it's way better than what everybody else does, right? So it's really not only knowing what you have, Subir, it also is crossing those political / personal silos, and then developing a plan that somehow magically doesn't make one person really unhappy, because it's the value proposition. It's all risk, and it's also laying out the value proposition so everybody comes on board. Because if they're not on board, I don't care how brilliant your plan is, it's going to have issues. So it's planning, it's assessing, planning, looking at risks, and then coming out with something that people can buy into.
Yep.
Yeah, in
And
fact, you should actually, sorry, go ahead.
I like the perspective on risk, because there are, you know, there's some pretty known metrics out there today on why certain bad actors are getting access to systems, and why it's been such a problem. A lot of it is with privileged access and taking over accounts and things like that. So there's probably some tactical things that you can, you know, put up front, but then strategically, I agree, Vanita, you kind of got to take a baseline and then align it with where you need to go.
Yeah, and in fact, on that, you know, I would also recommend doing some road mapping, because, you know, when it comes to, you know, security, information security today, there are different levels that you want to sort of climb through. And, you know, when you have the kind of what you're calling about the 55 countries, different rules, regulations across them, you have to come up with a common baseline to say, okay, this is the bare minimum that we've got to maintain, and then sort of progress down the roadmap to really get to a place where you are in the right place, because this is not going to happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey. It's very, and you have to declare the wins as you are taking those steps.
Yeah, yeah, good point. All right, Katie. Well, I think we're running out of time. Why don't you go ahead and move through the next steps here on the agenda?
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the panelists for that excellent discussion. So this is Katie again, your webinar host, and I wanted to remind everyone listening that at the bottom of your screen, you should see question and answer and poll options. And it is now time to complete and submit your poll. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and get those answered, hit submit. If you have any questions for our panelists, go ahead and submit those now, and I'll get ready to read them out. So I'm going to end polling now, and I'm hitting share results. So I'd like to give the panelists an opportunity to comment on any patterns or trends that you see here. And panelists, this is also important because the folks that are watching this afterwards, once it's been recorded, they won't be able to see the poll on the screen. So call out any highlights that you see, anything that's surprising, and then we'll move on to question and answer.
Yep.
And there's a gray bar on the right side of the poll results that should allow you to scroll up and down so you can see all 6 of them.
Yeah, I mean, what's striking to me is that there are a lot of good, there are a lot of folks that are doing well at a lot of these things. I mean, we've got sort of three rankings, right?
Yeah.
It's bad, it's pretty good, or it's okay. And I think the prevalent, what we're seeing is a lot of these answers, people are doing okay, which means there's probably some room to improve. There's probably a little pain too. You know, the one that's got probably the most pain says our power users have an extra measure of safety for accounts they use to control sensitive privilege. So privileged access management obviously has been a buzzword for, you know, a couple of years now. It's kind of been ranked as the top pain point. It doesn't look like that's any different from this survey. It looks like some companies, less than half, are doing okay with it. More are doing pretty good at it, or I mean, 25% really good at it, but there's always room to improve that process and to take the maturity up to another level, more automation, more seamless user experience.
And I think the assessment we all offer, Keith, comes you know, a long way in helping you. You know, when you say you're doing okay, and I've never been very good at, you know, being correct about these things, but does it mean you don't know what you don't know? Or does it mean that you know what you have and everything is fine? To me, there's that gray area that we all fudge it a little bit and say, yeah, it's fine. So I think an assessment, even if it's a one-day affair, if it's something that says, hey, let me just look at what I have. I think what we have found, at least in our experiences, we've helped our customers see areas they didn't know about. They
Sure.
thought they had their privileged accounts covered. Then they discovered there were these routers, there were these things sitting out there that they never thought about, right? There were
Yeah.
these well-known passwords. You know this, you know the drill.
Yeah. And one of the key benefits of getting people in a room to talk about how well they're doing is just the collaborative nature of uncovering issues, right? So someone in the room might say, "Oh, we're doing fine there." The other person at the other end of the table may say, "Excuse me,
Exactly.
not so fast," right? And we see that every time when we go through those scoring processes. That when you get the collaborative discussion in a room from all your key stakeholders who are impacted by IAM, some who've never really had a voice, you start hearing the truth. And there's a lot of pain out there with these processes that definitely need to be addressed to give your constituents a great experience and help your business. What everybody's after. And IAM, if you're involved in IAM, we call it a noble profession, right? You are working to secure your company's identities at the end of the day. And that's a very noble cause. If you can't get your arms around your identities and provide security for that, you're leaving doors wide open. And, we take it very seriously. We're very proud of the work we do. All these companies on this webinar would say that. We focus on it, we invest in it, we do the best job we can to help our clients be great at securing their enterprises. So
I would say, to kind of expand on what Vanita was saying, question 4 kind of highlights, I think, exactly what Vanita was saying. It's our workers only have access to what they need to do their jobs and nothing more. Not a single person came back and said it's not a problem. You got 75% that says they're doing okay, and I think that's kind of where what Vanita's kind of pointing out. And you got 25% saying it's painful. I think that we're doing okay is kind of along the same lines as Vanita. We think we're probably okay, but if it's definitely not a problem, then if no one can say it's not a problem, there's probably some systems out there that they really don't know who has the right accesses to them. So
yeah.
It's definitely probably something that they could, again, you get some type of assessment, you can help really nail down and find what those systems are and get those situations resolved.
Sure.
Recently we did an identity assessment for a company that has an automated identity management system. We had and we had to go through the different teams. We went to HR, we went to the business, we went to the team that manages it, we went to information security. No surprises. The team that manages it and information security told us it was all singing, all dancing, everything was wonderful. The minute we talked to HR, they said, we have no idea what we're supposed to put in when we request these roles. When we talk to legal, they go, we don't even know the implications when we pick some of these roles. And so the conversation started changing. And I actually asked for the identity management team and the InfoSec team to come in and sit with us, because it got to the point where we were hearing things that they had no clues about, because nobody was talking about it. Everyone was just going through the process because that was their solution. However, when we started talking to them and saying, hey, how is it going? I got this laundry list of problems. So it's interesting how it's also perception, because you are seeing what you are seeing. You're working in your silo, you're busy, you're solving problems. And Subir, this comes back to your thing about Qantas is sitting in the cloud and solving my problems, so I don't care. And we're sitting in our cloud and saying it's great. But monthly, we reach out to Subir and the team and say, hey, how's it going? We step outside our comfort zone. So that's really key to some of what we do. We can silo ourselves and we can say, yep, it looks good, but we've got to engage in an enterprise, because when you go into the cloud, you're no longer in your own little silo where you go in and you tinker with the server every time something goes down. That's
Right.
important. Mindset has to change.
Yeah, and again, I just want to highlight, this is not, trust me and send it out, okay? That's not what's happening here. We have a very strong control point to, the things that you just mentioned about, understanding the roles and what people's access need to be. I have a quarterly review set up, Okay, we have workflows which we've established on our side to manage this effectively. And we've actually spent time with every role within the company to make sure we understand what they need to access. And we've actually set up a concierge process so that managers don't need to know. They sit down and saying, I have this person starting, this person moving from this job to this job. They send the request in, it's a ServiceNow, protocol, and pretty much the provisioning team knows exactly what role that is and how they need to manage the change. And it's taken years of maturity to get here, but it tells you how important security is and why we sit down and manage it effectively. It's a maturity process.
Yep, good point.
Well, thank you for going through the poll results. We have about 5 minutes remaining, and I've got a handful of questions. I'd love to jump in here and see if we can get some of them answered. First question, and I'll just toss this out to the panel, so whoever wants to answer it, feel free. My company has an existing identity and access management solution that we are in the process of migrating to a cloud-based solution. What's best practice for identities no longer in use? Should they be migrated over into the new solution?
Want me to take it? I'll take it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So really, I mean, when you've got a lot of, you've had it automated, you've got these identities, they got disabled over time, or, nobody uses them. You have two choices, right? You just carry everything over to your cloud solution, and now you start doing access reviews and taking them out, or you take them out before you migrate them. And you've got to decide as an organization, what is your rehire policy? Do you think some of these people will come back? Because we have another bank we work with where they have said that they have a lot of rehires. So for them, it made sense to carry over their disabled accounts, right? Because they knew that these people might come back. There's another customer we have where they said, these people will look and see how many of them have used the system in the last 2 years. Have we had them employed them in the last 2 years or 3 years? If not, off they go. So you've got to define, again, as part of your planning, how you want to deal with this. And it's not a one size fits all. It is different organization by organization.
Thank you, Vanita. Question number 2, what are some of the criteria to be evaluated when selecting an IDaaS solution, like the one from Okta or SailPoint, versus hosting what we currently have into the cloud?
I can take this one, and then Subir could probably even chime in, because it's exactly kind of what they went through. But it's pretty much what a lot of this discussion today was about. It really comes down to, what is your investment in your existing system, in your existing solution? What is your program? How is your program been established? How mature is it? And does it transition well to any existing cloud-based systems or any IDaaS-based environments out there, that it's not going to require just a total lift and replace of everything, including the impact it would have on your user base. So it really comes down to, where are you at today? What capabilities that maybe you've had to build over time that may not even exist in a system that's an existing IDaaS system today. So there's going to be multi-facets that you have to evaluate to determine. It's not going to be just, hey, it's in the cloud. It's a lower cost per user, and I can go on a monthly basis. I mean, that's all great, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to just facilitate everything you do today. Yep. Within the program into that system.
Yep.
Yeah, I can just sit down and say budget, time, and features that you're looking for. Which exactly are you going to trade off? And especially if you have an investment in it, you've pretty much got a lot going on. You now just need to open it up into engaging on the cloud, and it just seems to be a faster path. I can tell you that the others will require you to integrate all their capabilities into your legacy systems, which becomes a long journey.
Well, we are now out of time. There's a few questions that didn't get answered. We'll make sure to answer the questions offline that we didn't have time to cover today. It was a pleasure having you join us. I'd like to let you know that the next session in our series on identity and access management best practices will be in March. Thanks for joining us for this panel discussion on the foundational concepts of cloud identity and access management. And we look forward to having you join us again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Subir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabir.
Thank you.